Hi, I'm Darrin Peppard. Welcome to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, the podcast dedicated to today's hardworking leader. Join me every Sunday for leadership insight, inspiration, and a little pep talk to keep you rolling down your road to awesome. Hey friends, welcome into episode 111 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. My guest on the show today is Dr. Bryan Pearlman. And we're going to get to Dr. Pearlman here in just a moment. But before we do, I want to begin the show a little bit differently this week. I want to actually give a shout out and say thank you to Miguel Gonzalez. So Miguel is somebody that I follow on social media. He also follows me. And earlier this week, Miguel shared a Saturday Simple Strategy of the week, as he put it, for assistant principals, principals, and ed leaders. And he stated that the post was inspired by yours truly on the Leaning into Leadership podcast, and said, you know, if you're not tuning into this show weekly, you are missing out. And what he talked about was say my name, the power in calling people by name. And yes, that's definitely something that I love to talk about here on the podcast, and something that I believe very strongly in. So Miguel, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the shout out on that. And folks, I got to tell you, when this type of feedback happens, when we get those 5-star reviews, when you leave an actual written review for the show, it is really, really powerful. You know, in so many ways, it helps me know that the work that I'm doing when I'm sitting here staring into this microphone or you know, having a conversation with a guest is actually resonating with others out there, that it's making a difference, that it's something that strikes a chord with you and that you want to share with other people. So thank you again, Miguel. Thank you to all of you who have left those wonderful 5-star reviews on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. So wherever you're doing those, folks, please keep that going for us. We really appreciate that. The more of those reviews we get, the more people actually end up getting an opportunity to hear and check out the show. So again, thank you to all of you who are there supporting us and allowing us to bring some positive words, maybe some encouragement, maybe a little bit of wisdom to you each and every Sunday here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. And speaking of bringing wisdom to you, holy cow, today's guest is absolutely going to do that. Dr. Bryan Pearlman, if you don't know, is a veteran educator, school administrator. He's a mental health therapist. He's also a keynote speaker and an adjunct professor. Bryan is the author of 3 books. His first book, absolute groundbreaking book, Maslow Before Bloom, Basic Human Needs Before Academics, came out in May of 2020. His second book, Whatever It Takes for All Students to Succeed in School and Life, was released in January of 2019. And he has a brand new book out titled From Struggles to Successes, a handbook for parents and educators. Bryan is the co-founder and board member of the mental health nonprofit organization, the Distinguished School of Mental Health and Wellness. Their mission is to ensure that all students can be successful in school. They're out there assisting schools to implement best practices in mental health and wellness, and does some amazing things. They have the opportunity, honestly, for schools to receive that certification, that they are demonstrating the highest levels of mastery when it comes to mental health and wellness. So make sure you're checking them out at dsmhw.org. Bryan and I sat down and had a wonderful conversation recently, and we talked about how there's just so many challenges right now related to mental health needs. And so to get the perspective of somebody who not only has been a school administrator, but is also a mental health professional was really powerful. We also talked about just how do we best support educators and students today, and then how can adults do a really good job for themselves of setting boundaries and setting priorities. So that, of course, a pep talk at the end of the episode. But what a fantastic conversation, folks. I can't wait for you all to hear it, and you're going to get it right after this.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get on to the episode.
to start this week's podcast than to just sit down with two former principals who really, really enjoyed the work, appreciated the work, and now do everything they can to support those who are still doing the work. My guest on the show today is Dr. Bryan Pearlman. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me here on the show.
Darrin, it's a pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, before we dive in, and I know we're going to talk about a lot of really great stuff today, just really quick for my listeners who maybe don't know you extremely well, just share a little bit about you, a little bit about your path, maybe about what you're doing now.
Well, thanks, Darrin. Yeah, so I was a teacher, like all of us. I was a principal for a long time. And then when I left education, I joined my wife's mental health therapy practice, went back, got a degree in that, and see clients now, kids, teens, adults, families, and do that. I do a lot of keynote addresses. I do a lot of PD all over the country with a real focus on mental health, challenging behaviors, self-care, mental health. I think I might have said mental health, but yeah, a lot of stuff in that area. And in my free time, I teach 2 courses at university here in St. Louis. So spend a lot of time working with teachers, working with social workers and counselors, principals, superintendents, all of the above, and with a real focus on connecting sort of the school world with the mental health world as someone who is now walking in both of those areas.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. That work is really important, obviously, and certainly, I think you did say mental health more than once, but you know what? You probably should, because it's just really that important right now, right? I mean, it's just something that has that much of an emphasis. And, you mentioned that you're working with, middle school kids, high school kids, and one of my favorite podcasts, John Acuff's All It Takes Is a Goal. And John was talking recently on one of his episodes about how finally we're seeing more and more middle school and high school kids reaching out for that support, that therapy. But now he's in Nashville, but he was saying that it's up to a 6-month wait for a kid to get in to see somebody. I mean, is that something that's like a Nashville problem? Is that a national problem? Are you seeing that in St. Louis? Is it that way as well?
So Darrin, again, kind of traveling the country, working with people, I hear that a lot. There is a long line to get in, for sure, to see psychiatrists. That's everywhere. I mean, it's at least 6 months. And unfortunately, the system is a little bit skewed, and it's a supply and demand thing, where often to get a psychiatrist, if you were in need of medication or something of that sort as a new patient, really the only way you're going to see someone quickly is if you end up in the emergency room, and that's going to get you in to see someone. Otherwise, just trying to reach out through offices, it is a long wait, particularly for those that see kids and teens. There's certainly a real shortage of psychiatrists. In the therapy and counseling world, which is where I spend a big chunk of my time, nationally it is a long wait, and many providers, don't take new clients, or it's very hard. I know in the practice, I work with my wife here and with one other practitioner. The one thing that kind of makes us stand out is that we always guarantee that we'll get someone in within a week. And sometimes, Darrin, as I talk about self-care and things, trying to get people in without a week means sometimes at the cost of our own self-care. But, especially for these ages, if someone does take the time and calls out for help, we don't want them, waiting. We want to get them in here, get them rolling, give them some tools, help them work through some things, and, kind of do our part in that.
So I'm curious. You were talking about this before we hit the record button, but you were saying that nationally we're seeing just such an increase in the number of kids with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. These typically were adult problems that now we're seeing more and more in kids. Talk a little bit more about that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe share some things that our educators in the classroom, our educators in administration roles, that type of thing, can do to keep their eyes open, to really look for those signs so they're able to support the kids.
So I'll start with the last part of what you said, which is so critically important, is that idea of noticing, noticing changes in attitude, appearance, these sorts, achievement, really just noticing those things. And I'll tell you, in my last gig as a principal, some years ago, one of the things that we set up a structure where I would stand outside, as many principals do, and fist bump, high five, bro hug, do whatever that stuff is. But I set it up that there are always 7 or 8 other people. So every kid would have to interact with so many adults. And really, that's level 1 triage, that we were looking for kids that maybe were too high or too low, or noticed that they were looking off, or they weren't making, eye contact, or someone who always told you a whole story. And then, perhaps that day they didn't say anything. There's a story there. And probably the most important thing that we can do is notice that, right? Have it that there are adults that kids can trust. So if something is on their mind, they have someone that they can talk to. And in some ways, I say it can really help change, a life trajectory. In some ways, I think you can save a life just by noticing and communicating, because someone will tell you if they're hurting, or if they have, dark thoughts and things of that sort. Back to the beginning of what you were saying, I think probably as you and I got into education, a few years ago at least, it was an adult problem. Maybe you heard things about high schoolers dealing with anxiety and depression. Maybe there was a story, once every blue moon about, self-harm or a suicide attempt or something of that sort. And then it sort of became also a middle school problem. Then it seemed to become also an elementary problem. And I can tell you, just in my practice here, it was about 2 years ago, a parent had said, I want to bring my child in. My child has suicidal ideation, has a suicide plan. We're really worried. The depression's really high. And they have articulated, sort of this detailed plan, and saying that life really wasn't even worth living. And Darrin, the thing that really shocked me is this was a 5-year-old. This was in kindergarten. Wow. Back when I was in kindergarten, the biggest thing I had to worry about and was stressed about is if I could get the green carpet square to take a nap on, or to get to the lunchroom soon enough so I could get a chocolate milk and not be stuck with just a regular milk. So really, this is not the type of thing, early on when I would travel around, people would say, well, maybe you'd like to cater that conversation to our middle and high school or a neighborhood college. Our preschool, elementary probably don't need to worry about it. And I'm like, I think the preschool and elementary kids, the staff need to worry about this a lot more, because your secondary people are already aware of this. I mean, to some degree, they may not have all of the tools or have a black belt in dealing with mental health, but at least are aware. It's something that we talk about. And, for even our littles, it's just, it's a big problem. It is a really big problem. It's, as I think most of the mental health people I work with say, it's a really good problem for business, but not a really good situation for the status of how people are doing, in our country, internationally. And I would really love to put myself out of business when it comes to things like depression and suicidal ideation and self-harm. So yeah, this is definitely no longer just a college adult type of problem. Anyone who works with kids in any way, shape, or form, need to be paying attention to these changes, as I said.
So I'm wondering, the more we see this at that elementary level, the more it makes me wonder where the root causes are. What has allowed, or what has been the driver for moving this down to such early ages? I mean, a 5-year-old, are you kidding me? That's just unreal. So, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, but any thoughts on where some of that root cause is, and what, I don't know, what do we do about it?
So that's an excellent question, Darrin. It really is. I think that, certainly as we are, going through, this year and where we are, that certainly, though, all of us, lived through a once in 100-year pandemic. I don't think that's helped anyone. I haven't met any person who said their life is better off now, or better off as a result of living through this. I definitely think as we look at trauma measures and things like ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, at one point they said 2/3 of us have endured at least one traumatic sort of thing. I think post-pandemic, I think it's 100% of us. And I think there's a statistic that those kids and teens that have endured at least 4 of those, that's kind of like 1 in 8 of us, maybe even 1 in 6 of us, perhaps 1 in 5 now. So I think trauma is a big piece of this. I think living through a pandemic, the isolation, looking at the little guys and little kids who started kindergarten on a computer or started kindergarten in a classroom with masks. You can't read other people's emotions. I really like the idea that 93% of communication are not the words you're saying. It's your eyes, your face, your body language, it's your tone. And a lot of those things, it's hard to read that when you're on a computer or there's a mask on someone's face. I think the other piece is that there is such a pressure on kids these days. And I sound like I'm 100 years old because everybody said that when I was, kids these days. I feel like there's just so much pressure on them, both for performing at a young age. Like a kid's born, they're 3 months old. We got to get them on the list for private kindergarten now. We've got to make sure they have 17 activities because Harvard might be looking. They're really scouting for today's 4 and 5-year-old for the classes of the future, which of course is sarcasm. They're not doing that, but so much pressure. And it doesn't mean that someone isn't intelligent. It doesn't mean that they're not fully capable of being extraordinary, but that the light bulb hasn't come on yet. And developmentally, you look at the age, you bring in a kindergarten class, you could have a kid who was born like literally the day of the cutoff, and some kids that almost took a red shirt year, that they're actually older. And you might not think that's a big deal, but if it's almost a year older, that's 16 to 20% of a life that the other person hasn't experienced. So the pressure to perform, the pressure to, we've got to get these kids to do, and there are kids capable and we should be pushing them. But for other kids, the other piece is I remember a lot of play in elementary school, and play isn't fun time only. It isn't, an escape from learning. I think it is learning. You're outside, you're seeing nature, you're interacting, you're having these social pieces, but there's such a cut in that for, and again, I'm going to sound like I'm up on my soapbox, the idea of test scores and the idea of, where it's almost like this one, we've got to get everyone to this one place at this one time. And in the history of the world, that's never happened for anyone. So I think that could be the over programming, the amount of pressure on kids, the traumatic piece. I certainly think screens haven't helped us. They're good for so many things. But like I was in the grocery store the other day, there was a kid that I can't imagine was, even 2 years old and had a big iPad in front of him the whole time going through the grocery store because it's the only way, or I guess parents are feeling to keep their kids so they're quiet so they can do what they need to do. When I remember going through the grocery store with my parents, and you're learning just by looking, or, going on a family road trip, we were looking and seeing different things as we traveled. And now nobody's looking at anything but a screen. So I feel like all of these factors, and probably a bunch more, have really led to the situation that we're in. And still, for people our age and those who have kids and teens, I still think there's a stigma to the idea of mental health. It's the kind of thing we're just going to look the other way, put our head in the sand, they're going to be fine, don't worry about it, when that's just not the case. It's kind of like saying, you have a heart condition, we're just going to look the other way and hope it goes away, or diabetes or something. So it's a very long answer to your short question, Darrin, but there's a lot of variables at play here.
Well, that's what I like to do here on the show. Just float a really short question out there that has all kinds of layers to it. And I'm probably going to head right into another one here, because I think, number one, I think you hit on so many key elements. Listening to you talk, Bryan, just about like pressure that parents are both feeling, but then also putting on on their kids. It took me to, honestly, a conversation I had yesterday with a principal that I'm working with. Their high school softball team just won the state championship. They had two extremely successful pitchers on the team, only one of which got to pitch in the championship game. The other, while elated for what turns out to be her best friend, the other pitcher, was also just crushed and devastated because her dad's feedback was, see, you're not good enough. You should have been the one pitching in that game and not her, and that's on you. And, the pressure we put, and this kid's a sophomore in high school, I mean, and you talk about 5-year-olds that are needing to have, therapy and support. And there's so many high level needs and so many stressors that I think all of us deal with. And so I want to kind of push that forward a little bit and now move to the adults, and specifically the adults that are in our schools, our classroom teachers, our paraprofessionals, our administrators, librarians, secretaries, and so forth. We ask a lot of them to now be that support. Social emotional learning has become a big buzzword, and there's a lot of training in this space around how we support kids, which is wonderful. But the adults have been through a lot of trauma too. And what I've noticed, Bryan, when I'm in schools, I hear this a lot from a lot of different schools, that some of the work that was happening in the school, maybe they were really going down a good path on standards-based grading, or they were really going down a strong path with their multi-tiered, systems of support, or their PBIS systems, or whatever, whatever it might be. And coming back and getting moving again, it's like teachers fell to this factory reset mode where it was more stand and deliver, more consequential, as opposed to looking for teachable moments. How do we support our teachers? How do we support our other adult educators? Because they've been through trauma too. They're struggling with their mental health.
That's another excellent question, Darrin. It's interesting because even pre-pandemic, I would have people say to me, I love that our school or our school district is saying how committed they are to mental health, to learning about trauma, and the real push for self-care. And then, but on the same breath, they just gave us, 3 new things to implement this year with fidelity and to become experts of. And the expectation is that, which when you introduce anything new, there is that learning curve, and we're stepping out of our comfort zone, and change is scary. And this job, even this job 30, 40 years ago was difficult. It's just getting more and more so. So by and large, I'm not sure that the adults are doing okay. And as I talk about, one of the trainings I do is called Self-Care Doesn't Make You Selfish. And they love it, and everyone loves it, and they say it, but the feedback I always get is, but when am I going to do that? But my plate's already full, and they're saying now, oh, you did a great job convincing our central office or our principals, so that's going to be a goal. Everyone has to have a self-care goal. That's fantastic, but nothing has come off of my plate. And I'm already, not in a good place. We talk a lot about window of tolerance, right? Imagining a window opening and closing. Maybe, Darrin, if you and I are hanging out at a concert or sporting event, our window of tolerance is wide open. A guy bumps into us, who cares, man? We're at a concert or at the sporting event. It starts drizzling. I don't care. Look, we're at this thing. Look how amazing this is. And you can deal with a number of setbacks and still be in a good place. The problem is life and stressors and everything. There are people waking up with their window of tolerance is almost closed. And the problem is when that window slams closed, the body's response to that is adrenaline, fight, flight, freeze, right? The ability to communicate goes down. Logic, reasoning, critical thinking, and problem solving goes down. In fact, Bruce Perry, who's a psychiatrist out of Chicago, has written books on trauma and other things to do with mental health, says that when that adrenaline gets going, sort of that reptilian brain, that survival mode, and all that your functional IQ can drop by 50 points. So when you hear things, when people or principals say to you, my gosh, one of my staff members, I don't even know what got into them, or, someone just ran out of the door, or whatever it is, I'm like, ooh, Darrin, call on me. I got the answer. The reason is, I mean, that's what happens, right? And it's panic and survival mode. The brain and the body in that mode can't differentiate between real and perceived threat. So no different between, oh, great, another thing that's due by 5 o'clock today, and holy smokes, there's a lion right there about to pounce on me. The reaction is really the same. So the problem is, and we see this in mental health, dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress, we also see this a lot within the trauma world, that the idea is sort of that fight, flight, and freeze is really a good survival thing if literally a lion's chasing us, but it's not so good to live in that zone all the time. It has really bad negative health and mental health outcomes as a result of being in that, they call it almost like a chronic stress or chronic trauma type situation. So there is a lot there. I think as I've been asked, by administrators, central office people, board members, and so forth, I'd be like, you know what? Let's get down to what are the key and most important things that we need to get across to our students. And let's really have a time period of getting really good at those things and not add anything to the plate unless we're taking things off of the plate. And Darrin, you and I both administrators for a long time. We know how this goes. You keep going to your ace, your relief pitcher. You always go to the same person. And after a while, it's like, I've had the greatest teachers you ever work with come in and say, I can't get my head above water. And you're, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to bury you, but you're just a superstar. So of course I came to you. And, also teaching adults to be able to say no and no thank you and set boundaries, or being able to say, I have 50 things to do by next Friday. Can you help me prioritize which things and what are the things that we can back burner or get assistance on? And again, that's for us as administrators too. I worked really hard my last few years as administrators saying, what are things that anyone can do, and having anyone do that, and what are the things that only Bryan can do? And then make sure that became the priority, because, the last point in this is there's that thing that if we don't pick a day for self-care, taking care of ourselves, our body's going to pick one for us, and it's never going to be a convenient time for us. So right. Like if I end up getting really sick or in the hospital for a week, all those things that anyone in Bryan can do, particularly the Bryan things, are just going to sit there waiting because I'm the only one who can do it. So I think that's another very long answer to a short question, but by and large, I don't think the adults are doing well. And we do spend a lot of time talking about the kids because we're in the business of working with kids and teens, but our adults aren't doing so well either.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and you've really hit on some big pieces there. I want to stay on the one that you kind of wrapped up with administrators being really mindful of what they are putting on the plates of others, and I really like how you talked about what only Bryan can do versus what anybody can do, because administrators, the ones I'm working with them, right now, so many of them are just taking on everything. And in a way, it's because they don't want to put more on somebody else's plate. But unfortunately, what they're doing is they're causing their own plate to just completely overflow. They're not getting to the things that are really important, the things that really, as you put, only they can do. And unfortunately, that means that they're falling into just being a manager, not really being a leader. And one of the things I think teachers really want and need right now is somebody who is really a leader for them. And part of that is identifying what really matters, what doesn't matter. Let's get the things that don't matter off the plate. Let's get them out of the way. Let's be focused on what we've got to do, because there's this massive expectation on our educators right now to fix it, whatever it is. And it is mental health crisis. It is a learning gap. It is a political division that we've never seen before, on and on and on. All of these things that fall on our educators to fix. So, yeah, absolutely. Administrators, listen to those words. Be focused on what only you can do, what are the things that everybody can do, and then also how do you get things off of people's plate. Really, really great words, Bryan. Really great advice. Let's do this. Let's transition to the last question I ask everybody here on the show. This is the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So, Bryan, what are you doing right now to lean into leadership?
Well, again, and you're batting 1,000 with really great questions. It's awesome to be here, and I wish this conversation could be even much longer. I really enjoy this. The thing about leaning into leadership and doing things of this sort, I feel like a lot that I'm doing in the leadership realm really has to do with being a role model and define that how you want, whether it's kids and teens that I'm seeing in my practice, whether it's coaching and mentoring the adults that are coming in my practice, whether it's utilizing social media or email or phone, text as people reach out and are really seeking that leadership and really seeking a path, seeking advice, seeking assistance. It's a lot easier, I think, Darrin, for you and I, in the sense to be really objective, because we're not really emotionally connected to Susie in third grade or Miss Brown in the fifth grade or eighth grade classroom. We're just not emotionally. It's a lot easier for us to do that, and I feel like there is a lot of comfort that people gain from talking to someone who's been there and done that, who's working regularly with schools and can say, this isn't a Nashville problem, this isn't a Boston problem, this isn't an LA problem. It's going on everywhere, and then helping lead by example and showing how, even though, I mean, you and I are both quite busy. If we went through everything that we do in a week or a month, it's a lot. And sometimes I reflect, and I don't know how all the stars align that I could, really get that stuff done. But being able to say, I walk every night. I both read pedagogy and philosophy every day, but at night I read mindless books that just get, eyes over text. I spend time with my kids. I go to concerts, and just finding that piece, and maybe, as I've said, self-care, maybe the leadership, the best way of leaning into leadership, the best way of being a role model is really helping people understand what it means to be successful. And I think that there may be a misconception on TV, on social media and things, that it means what kind of car do you have, your house, what money you have in the bank, and all of that stuff. And that's not at all how I gauge success as a leader, as anybody. It doesn't matter what our titles are. All of us are leaders in some way. But the thing that I see is balance. Balance is my big word, and it's a thing I've totally adopted, that I don't care if you have $80 billion and you grew a company out of nothing when your home life is not doing well. Or, it used to be sort of a pissing contest of who can get in the office the earliest and send the earliest email, and who can send the latest one, and who's sending stuff over the weekend. And I kind of feel like that's not something to be proud of. I think that's not good. And it sends the wrong example to those that we are leading and the future leaders that we're trying to inspire. To me, it's a lot better saying, I'm not emailing you over the weekend. I don't really want you doing work after you leave the schoolhouse. You work plenty hard now. Go be with your family or your friends, or do what you need to do for your own wellness and balance and self-care. So if anything, it's to show that, I juggle a lot. There is a lot on my plate. I love it. Before we recorded, both of us were sort of talking about those things. I wouldn't give up any of them. But if any of them got in the way of family time or self-care or my health, I would have to scale back some way, shape, or form. And I feel like that's the best way, all of us. It's not just saying, do self-care. Okay, great. When am I going to do that? Or have a balanced life. Great. How are you going to do that? As leaders, it's really modeling that for other people. And it's kind of walking the building saying, it's you probably should get going, or, hey, I got this, you get going. It seems like you're here late every day. Go see your family. What can I do to help? Maybe my load is lighter. Maybe a teammate can say, Darrin, you're buried right now. Let me help. And, I'm sure you can help me down the road when I'm the one sinking in quicksand. So I think it goes back to, leading by example, balance, and, just moving forward. I think that's the key to success here.
Excellent. I love that. Love that answer. Certainly, there are going to be those people who want to reach out and connect with you, learn more about the work that you do with schools and supporting them with mental health. How do people get in touch with Dr. Bryan Pearlman?
So there are quite a few ways to do that. One, very active on whatever X is, formerly known as Twitter, Dr. P _ principal. So it's DRP _ principal. Follow me, I'll follow you back. Message me anytime. On Facebook, which I think is still called Facebook, we have a group there that you can find if you just go to groups. It's Maslow Before Bloom. So join us. It's a private group. There's so many people. I think there's 30,000 people there from every state, every Canadian province, every country, every level. There's people in mental health. There's people in physical health. There's teachers, administrators, all of the above. And it's a really great platform. I'm a big proponent, Darrin, of not reinventing the wheel. Let's use the resources that we have out there and sort of crowdsource the problems, challenges. Otherwise, they can also reach me by email. It's Bryan with a Y at mostvaluablepd.com. And lastly, my phone number, you can text me anytime. This might be dangerous, but you can text me anytime, 314-323-7340. So reach out anytime. Come to St. Louis, visit with me. It's a great town. I'd love to see you. And sure appreciate it, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great conversation. I agree with you. We could carry this one on for quite some time. So next time I'm in St. Louis, or the next time our paths cross when we're both out and about on the road, we will make sure and pick up that conversation right there. So thank you so much, Bryan, for joining me here on the podcast.
All right, folks, awesome conversation with Dr. Bryan Pearlman. Make sure that you jump down there in the show notes, check him out, get connected with him. My goodness, he gave you his cell phone number. Reach out to Bryan Pearlman. The guy means it. He is there to help, and he is truly an incredible human being. Check out that brand new book and get connected with Bryan. And now it's time for a pep talk. So I was having this conversation with a leader earlier in the week, and one of the things that we were talking about was this particular goal, this particular effort, if you will, that this leader wanted to see happening in the departments that they work with. And in essence, it was really working to up the professional practice that's happening in the PLCs. In essence, this leader wants people to be sharing their professional practices, the successes that they're having in the classroom, their pedagogy with each other, and creating that true professional learning space. Absolutely admirable, absolutely the right work to be doing. However, this particular leader told me that because they'd been really, really busy this year, they had just kind of lost sight of that particular goal, had a sticky note saying, hey, this is what I want to work on, but hadn't yet pushed it forward, and decided that maybe before the end of the holiday break, they would go ahead and roll that out to their staff, the group that they oversee. Through some conversation, we talked about the importance of timing. You know, great work, when put in place with really good timing, can create some amazing things. But when we have great work, when we have a great idea and the timing isn't very good, a lot of times it doesn't turn out the way we want it to. You know, when I talk about the timing, it's not just about the time of year, but it's also about, do the people have the necessary skills to facilitate the work? Do the people have the confidence in themselves or the trust within the learning group, the PLC, to be able to share, to openly share, to have that dialogue? Or is it something that as a leader that you need to build that infrastructure to ensure that they are going to be set up for success and that the work that you envision can truly happen? Because ultimately your end user, the outcome, the value that you're looking for is increase in student performance, increase in student outcomes. And those things can happen when great work and great timing come together. When they don't, unfortunately, the results may vary. Let's just say that. So I'm really happy to say that this particular leader has kind of modified their plan and is really going to work to ensure that The people that she is asking to facilitate this work have the skill set necessary and the confidence to be able to truly lead this work and to lead it to the successful outcome that she's looking for. So, folks, just be really mindful of that. Great work and great timing are both necessary for great work to happen. Thanks so much for joining me here on the podcast. Have a Road to Awesome week. Thank you for listening to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, brought to you by Road to Awesome. Don't forget, click subscribe, give a review, and share this with somebody who might also enjoy leaning into leadership.